What's going on? I am here in Colorado. Obviously, I'm draped out in my Patagucci. I'm here because on my last video, a lot of you asked about floating the cider, where to use it, how to rig it. Well, this river right here, the frying pan, this is where I learned how to do it. It's one of my favorite techniques, definitely not in all scenarios. It's a very niche thing. I'll break this down for you guys and hopefully we can learn a few things together, build some trust. Share playlists, find me on Instagram, it's crazy. Floating the cider is a technique used in conjunction with a Euro nymphing leader, and it's just a fancy way of saying putting floating on your leader. You're making your leader float. Your cider is a colored piece of nylon built into your Euro nymphing leader. I like a bicolor, it's easier for my eye to pick up. I am using Devin Olsen's thinner formula. The thicker your leader is, the easier it's gonna be to grease and suspend your flies. The thinner that it is, those heavier flies will pull it under. So kind of by having a leader formula in the middle, right, I'm able to float about 2.4 millimeter tungsten beads at distance. So why not just use a dry dropper rig? If you do that, it's gonna be harder to lift and fish your nymphs upstream and across. I use floating the cider when I'm fishing very light flies. I also float and grease the cider when I'm fishing dry flies to give my leader a little extra buoyancy, and I'm able to track that cider through the drift and help me pick up where my dry flies are. I like to float the cider when I'm fishing shallow water and I want both of my flies in the same band of the water column. I also like to float my cider when I'm fishing upstream or at distance. So when you saw me on Hot Creek, you couldn't wade there. My leader formula is thinner, but it's still pretty thick in terms of the Euro nymphing world. So what would happen is my leader would sag back and pull my flies out of the drift that I wanted. By greasing up my cider, casting and floating them at distance, I could keep my nymphs in the lane that I wanted to fish without having the weight of that nylon pull them out of the drift. That's something to consider when you're floating the cider. You know, I also like to float the cider in places that I guide, like the San Juan River, where you're only allowed to fish 2 flies. If I put a dry fly on to float my rig, I'm breaking the law, and that's a ticket that I don't want to pay for. Plus, I gotta keep my rep intact. So let's unpack this. I'm gonna fish, show you how to float the cider, how to rig up, and I really hope this helps you guys. And if I can help with anything else, drop it down in the comments below. So I like to let the river tell me how to rig today. When I'm floating the cider, I like to put my heavier fly on the dropper and my lighter fly on the point. I'll do this a lot if I'm fishing, you know, like the San Juan and I want both flies in the same band of the water column, or here on the frying pan. So I'm gonna go depth to my dropper, which is that top fly, and then I'm gonna put my lighter fly on the point. Now, if I'm fishing, for example, like when I was on Hot Creek and fishing 2 flies of the same size, double, then I will go depth to the point because I want it to drop horizontally, not hinge and have that heavier fly tag and hang up. I want to keep my flies suspending and floating and dropping for as long as possible. On the frying pan, I'm gonna fish 7X. The reason being it's gonna cut through the column a little bit faster, get my flies to depth a little bit better. I like to use Falling Mill's fluorocarbon. I did a review on that, so check that out. But Falling Mill makes the densest fluorocarbon on the market, so it's gonna sink quicker than other brands. That's why I'm a big fan. So for this river, I'm gonna be fishing smaller bugs, kind of size 20s. Because I want both of my flies to ride a little closer together, I'm only gonna space them about 20 inches apart. I don't like to cut my tippet. I like to keep that main line strong. So what I'm gonna do is, the deepest water I've seen in this section is about 4 feet deep. So I'm gonna pull off some tippet. I like to measure on my arm and kind of know, so when I pull off tippet, I can kind of pull off consistent length. About to the center of my chest is 3 feet. From the inside, that's about 12 inches. So that's about 4 feet. And then what I'm gonna do, is pull off another 20 inches, and I'll show you why. So that's about 20 inches to my bicep. I'm gonna cut it. Because I want the depth to be at 4 feet, right? So now this is 4 feet plus 20 inches. I'm gonna come back to my tippet spool, cut off 6 inches. I'm gonna find the end of my tippet, measure it, and I want this dropper to hit 20 inches above the point. Now, by cutting this 6-inch piece of fluorocarbon and doing a triple surgeon's knot like this, if I snap off the dropper, I will still have my point fly and I can reattach a tag. If I had cut this and I busted the knot at the surgeons, I would lose both flies. So rigging this way is really gonna help you save some flies. I'm gonna moisten that up, and you can see my dropper's hanging down, and I'm about 20 inches apart. Again, this isn't an exacting science, just get it close. When greasing the cider, I like to start above my transition material, get some grease on that knot, pull the transition material through, and then hit my cider down to the tippet ring. And sometimes I will grease the fluorocarbon to keep that floating up as well. Floating the cider is one of my favorite ways to throw small technical fly rigs, either nymphs or little dries, or weighted flies in combination with unweighted flies at distance. Something I wouldn't be able to fish up and across because I'm fishing a thicker leader formula. Floating the cider is also great when you're fishing smaller bugs at distance with a little bit of a breeze. Those smaller bugs, depending on how thick your leader formula is, will not pull that cider tight, or it won't, you won't be able to really fish a bow. That wind is gonna distort it. There's a slight breeze today. This is the perfect time to fish a greased line or float the cider. Floating the cider, I'm fishing Devin Olsen's thinner formula. It's a thicker in the world of Euro nymphing formula. It's just a good all-arounder, and I can even mend with it. If you're curious about floating the cider, Falling Mill, with the help of John Newberry, designed a cider which is great, especially for fishing waters like the frying pan. When floating the cider, it's important to keep your flies upstream and in line with each other, and try to keep that cider pointing at your flies and in line as best as you can. If a fish eats, it's just gonna be a twitch. You'll watch that cider dart up. Very subtle takes usually. All right, that's it. That concludes floating the cider. This is an excellent technique for presenting lightly weighted or weightless flies on a European nymphing leader at distance. I love using this technique in rivers like this one, the frying pan, Hot Creek as you saw, and any sort of small stream setting when I'm presenting upstream and I want to fish at distance. Just an all-around great technique. Another thing is just remember to re-grease your cider. If it starts to sink, that nylon will shed that paillette paste. But thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all the views and the positive feedback. If you want to see something in the next video, comment down below. Please remember to comment, like, and subscribe, and share this video if it helped you out. Hope to see you on the water, and yeah, go fish.